More of tomorrow's newspapers hot off the press shortly, but first, finally, we may be witnessing the birth of a media revolution in this country. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has bravely fronted up to biased public service broadcasters by announcing the sale of Channel 4 and putting the BBC on notice with the very real prospect of the licence fee being axed. Here's what the Culture Secretary told me last month in our exclusive GBNews interview.
There are some very good reasons why Channel 4 needs to be sold. It just hasn't helped itself. And I think there are people who've tried to help Channel 4 over the years, but it's just never wanted to.
It's wrong to force people to keep paying for the BBC licence fee just to watch TV, right?
Frankly, a funding model which was established in 1946, where, as you say, people have to pay, and they may not even watch the BBC just because they own a television set. You know, for so many reasons, it's an outdated model.
Now, one of the men who first set his sights on these major changes is the former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale, who served under David Cameron between 2015 and 2016, before becoming Media Minister for 19 months until late last year. So it was there that he helped spearhead the plan to make Channel 4 private, paving the way for Dorries to deliver the killer blow. And John Whittingdale joins me now. So, John, look, I know you always believed in this and you pushed for it behind the scenes, but for a long time there was a lot of resistance within the Tory party to actually press the button on the sale of Channel 4. How have you reacted to what has been, let's be honest, a lot of hysteria to the decision finally being announced?
Well, there's still quite a lot of controversy around it. I always took the view that Channel 4 has a very special role in UK broadcasting, and I want it to continue to prosper. But the way in which media is changing is that in my view, the model was going to come under increasing strain, and I didn't see in the long term how it could be sustained as a state-owned broadcaster that was wholly dependent on advertising revenue at a time when so many competitors were entering the market. So this is about trying to sustain Channel 4, and also I believe that the case for a second state-owned broadcaster has weakened over the years because there are so many new entrants into the market now.
Nadine, in that interview, said they haven't helped themselves with what has been, in my view, blatant left-wing posturing over the years. I mean, Dorothy Byrne, their long-time head of news, even, in my view, very offensively compared Boris Johnson to Vladimir Putin. Do you agree that they didn't help themselves by taking such a left-wing position?
Well, that wasn't the reason why I thought there was a case for a change of ownership. I wouldn't argue that sometimes they've made me very cross. I think they probably have made lots of politicians cross, but the particular examples you chose, especially the McTaggart lecture, which Dorothy Byrne delivered, did seem to me inappropriate for a public service broadcaster, which of course is required under the Broadcasting Code to be impartial and objective. And sometimes Channel 4 did give a strong impression of being rather less than fully impartial and objective. That isn't the reason, as I say, for the change of ownership, but, I think there are legitimate criticisms over some of the political positions they've taken in the past.
What do you make of this whole argument that Thatcher actually would have been supportive of the privatisation if she were alive today?
Well, as you probably know, I spent my first 5 years working for Margaret Thatcher. At the time when Channel 4 was created, and it was created under the Thatcher government, the world was completely different. You had the BBC, you had ITV, and Channel 4 was, as it says on the tin, it was the fourth channel. And that was all there was. And it did fill a gap for many, many years. Now, that gap now is no longer present because there are so many new broadcasters and there's such a huge variety of choice. Margaret Thatcher did not believe in state ownership unless there was a very, very strong case for state ownership. It was the Thatcher government which privatised, the gas industry, the telecoms industry, the electricity industry, British Airways, shipbuilders, etc. She believed in the private sector. So I think the chances are she would see the case for privatising Channel 4 as well.
Now, the BBC, the Culture Secretary, the current Culture Secretary, says, actually, this will be the last licence fee settlement. You think that might be moving a bit too fast? Why?
Well, I've always been a critic of the licence fee on the basis that it's a flat rate charge for which there is no relief, no matter what income you have.
Or how little of the BBC you consume.
Or indeed how little. You just
me, very, very little.
Just having a television set requires you to pay the licence fee. It's not ideal. The problem has been, up until now, that there is no viable alternative. I don't think advertising would work on the BBC. It would destroy those other channels that do depend on advertising. And you could move to a straightforward government subsidy, but there would be problems with that as well. There may come a time when you could adopt an alternative which would involve at least in part subscriptions, so people could choose whether or not to pay. But you can't do it yet because the technology doesn't allow it.
So you mean there would be a base fee, which would be a lot less than, what, the 159 quid that we pay today, which would maybe provide news, for example. So 30 quid or something, and then you could pay various add-ons if you wanted to have access to
That's one possibility.
services.
I mean, I think there is a case for public money to fund the traditional public service output. That would include news, probably some education, some arts, the kind of programming which would struggle to survive commercially.
But as a Brexiteer, do you accept that a lot of people lost faith in the BBC after the referendum because we saw the biased coverage with our own eyes? This isn't the BBC that we grew up with. And actually, we don't want to fund BBC News anymore because we simply don't believe that it is an impartial service. And, you know, I can give you countless examples. I know you know of the countless examples of their lack of impartiality.
I don't think the BBC is deliberately partisan. I do think that a criticism which has been made many times of the BBC is that they have a particular viewpoint. It's a very sort of metrocentric, liberal, small L, London
champagne
view,
coffee.
and they lost touch with the larger part of British opinion, which is why they're not alone, it wasn't just the BBC, but it's why a lot of the people from that background were so firstly horrified and secondly amazed when the British public voted in favour of Brexit. And
they didn't see it coming.
They did not see it coming. And the same thing to some extent happened in 2019. I mean, a cataclysmic general election where, you know, constituencies voted Conservative for the first time in history. And that too came out of nowhere. And I think that has been recognised, that the BBC, to some extent, have lost touch with some of that audience. And Tim Davie, who I have a lot of time for, is working quite hard to try and restore that.
Yes, he's the new director, or relatively new Director General.
Director General.
Because obviously we've got a local election coming up this week. And I just wanted to ask you about the hypocrisy, or what I see as the hypocrisy, of the BBC and other major broadcasters, it has to be said, their coverage of Partygate, which has been ad nauseum from December, you know, very brief break of a couple of weeks when a war breaks out in Europe, but essentially it has been non-stop from December until now. Every cough and spit of the Tory Partygate scandal has dominated news headlines. They don't seem at all interested in covering Keir Starmer's Partygate scandal, which looks just as egregious to me, with anywhere near the same fervour.
Well, I don't think the BBC are alone. I mean, actually, the media as a whole have been obsessed with this story for a long time, and the consequence has been that there is a great deal of anger, which I understand. You know, people were put through the most terrible deprivations necessarily because of COVID, but there's a lot of anger if they believe that others who set those rules were not abiding by them, and the Prime Minister has apologised, you know.
Yes.
I do feel we are confronting three of the biggest challenges that any government has ever had to face: a global conflict, or what could spill into it being a global conflict, post-pandemic, and a massive economic crisis. And those three things, you know, one alone would be enough for any government to deal with, but those are really big issues which are facing every government around the world. And I do think that some of the coverage in recent times has seemed to, you know, concentrate on relatively minor issues and has not given the attention to these enormous issues which are going to affect every single person in this country to the extent that they really should have done.
And finally, you're still backing Boris.
I supported Boris. I mean, Boris, you know, has made mistakes. He said so. But I still think that, on issues like Ukraine, his speech today in Kiev
was brilliant.
And which, I've worked with Ukrainians for a long time because I chaired the group in Parliament with the Friendship Group of Ukraine. And I know the support which they see the UK, and Boris in particular, to have given them is stronger than almost any other country. And it's those issues which really matter. And again, on COVID, we led the world out of the pandemic with the great assistance of the vaccine. But again, I think we got that right. And Boris is not without his flaws. He'd be the first to admit it. But I think on the big things, the government has a record of which they can be pretty proud.
Former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale, thank you so much.